Welcome to Color Me Green, a podcast focused on making the world a greener place. Hello everybody, I hope you've all been well. I've taken a little break, as you've probably noticed. No one ever said that having hobbies and working a full-time job while trying to make other hobbies your main job was easy. And if they did, they weren't doing it right. Or I'm not doing it right. That's also very likely. So we're just going to jump right into it. In today's episode, I wanted to discuss climate neutrality. I hope I'm saying that right, because I'm going to have to say it a lot. You're probably thinking, what in the world is that? Climate neutrality, wow, this is going to be tough. Climate neutrality is achieved through the elimination of all greenhouse gases at a rate that is equal to or less than the rate at which they are produced. The difference between this and carbon neutral is that the process focuses on different gases. Carbon neutrality focuses on the balance of carbon emissions, where climate neutrality focuses on the balance of all greenhouse gas emissions. The main point to take away from this is that being carbon neutral doesn't allow as much of a contribution to the aid in climate change, since it doesn't cover all the greenhouse gases, although it does include carbon dioxide, which makes up 80% of the planet's greenhouse gases. So now that we know what the goal is, how do we go about getting there? Well, eliminating all greenhouse gases would be the best option, but unfortunately, that's a little harder at the moment, but a work in progress. Until then, we can offset our emissions. So what exactly is carbon offsetting, and how do we go about doing it? Carbon offsetting is done through the process of an individual or a business purchasing the equivalent volume of carbon credits to compensate for their emissions. These payments are what make emission reduction projects work. These projects can reduce global emissions through improving technologies, raising awareness and behaviors, reforestation, as I've mentioned in a previous episode, and so much more. As I mentioned, whether you own a business or an organization, or you're just one person and want to lower your carbon footprint, you can offset your emissions. This should not be a standalone action, as there are many other things you can do and should be doing to lessen your footprint, but it's an additional step that makes a world of a difference. If you are wanting to offset your emissions, it's important to follow the following steps. First thing to do is to reduce your emissions. Very important. Next, you'd measure your remaining emissions and purchase emission reduction credits to offset any remaining CO2. Then you choose the offset project that you'd like your credits to fund. From there, global emissions get reduced and you get a certificate that shows your emissions have been offset. I took time aside from my research while I was doing it to go ahead and measure my emissions and see how much with certain projects it would cost me to offset those. And I realized while doing this that a big reason why people don't have more sustainable lifestyles is because of financial issues. And trust me, I totally get it. I'm not saying you have to offset your emissions every day or every week, but do what I did and total up a month and do it then, or a week or so out of the month, even just a few days. Something is better than nothing, and trust me, I get it. We can't all stop living our lives the way that we do and become carbon neutral or climate neutral or sustainable in just one day. It just doesn't happen. What I am saying, though, is that it's important to make small changes and take the steps in the right direction. Baby steps are still steps. As long as you're trying, you're already doing better than you were when you weren't trying at all. So find what works for you and give it a shot. I mentioned earlier that even businesses can become climate or carbon neutral certified. To do this, you can decide whether you want your whole business to be neutral or if you just want to focus on a certain project, product, or activity. Then you must define what emissions are included in each of those options. Once you know the source of your emissions, you can work with an emissions assessment provider that can help identify what data needs to be collected. They can help you get that data, and then they can calculate your total emissions. After this is where the real work begins. You have to actually commit. Now it's time to reduce your emissions by switching to renewable energy or making changes to business travel. And once you reduce your emissions, you finally get to communicate your message. You can deliver a clear and credible message to your audience and post your climate neutral certification for everyone to see. When I was doing research for a few other episodes, I noticed what companies had certain certifications, and as someone who would be either purchasing from them or spreading awareness about their company, it's very important to be able to see those certifications and exactly how transparent companies really are with their customers. Now the big question, why should we care about climate neutrality? Climate change, that's why. The more emissions we put out without doing anything to decrease them, the more impact we're going to experience from climate change beyond issues like extreme weather, rising sea levels, extreme temperature changes, all of that. We can also see changes in food scarcity and health issues. For an example, if the weather down south starts to get cold, somewhere that might produce a lot of crops for the entire country won't be able to produce those crops, and therefore we won't have food, or that certain type of food, and then other things can't get made, and it's a process. So I mentioned this in a few other episodes, and I'm really just referencing a lot of different episodes now, but just go take a listen and you'll see what I'm talking about. But you have to remember that just because you personally are not seeing the changes doesn't mean someone else isn't. If no positive change is made, those negative effects will eventually become apparent to you, and then it might be too late to change your actions. So please go and measure your emissions. Check out one of the offsetting programs I've linked in the show notes, and even just once a month or even a few times out of the year, offset your monthly emissions. Lower your footprint and join me on the journey to a climate neutral planet. I want to thank you for listening to today's episode of Color Me Green. New episodes are going to come out weekly, and hopefully each one has something you can take away and learn from. I currently have a ton of episodes planned, but if you want to request a certain topic to discuss, please feel free to message me on the show's Instagram at Color Me Green Podcast, linked in the show notes. If you loved today's episode, please make sure to leave a review, as I will be randomly picking reviews every week as they roll in to read on the show. One of the best ways to help change the world is to share this episode with a friend and let them also learn what they can do to live more sustainably. And as always, remember to reduce, reuse, recycle, and live green. See you next week.